So we'll do just a quick recap. I did a long recap in first service. We're gonna do a quick recap here. But we're in the second week of a series called Tug of War. We're doing a journey through, I wouldn't even say through the book of Romans. We're kind of hitting 5 different sections in Romans. But you might be wondering, why are we calling it Tug of War? Again, if you weren't here last week, I'll just highlight this really quick. One of the things that I noticed as I was preparing and working through writing this a couple months ago was that there seemed to be, the Apostle Paul who wrote the book of Romans, there seems to be some tension that he plays with throughout it. A lot of back and forth, almost like a tug of war. And so one of the things that we recognized last week is he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. That's what we worked through last week. And if you missed that, I'd really encourage you to go back and watch that. I don't often say that, but I think it was an important message if you were traveling, out of town, sick, whatever. I'd really encourage you to go back and watch that one. But one of the tensions that we talked about last week was you can either follow the world or you can follow Christ, right? And we walked through that. And so again, it's that idea of which side of the rope are you gonna grab? Are you gonna grab the world and pull over here? Are you gonna grab this side over here that says Christ, and I'm just gonna pull over here and do everything that I can to align myself with Christ and the things that he wants, even as culture goes in certain directions that might be a little bit challenging and unpopular for us to go as Christians, okay? And so we worked through that a little bit. Today we're gonna work through the tension between this thing called the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Now, if you grew up in church, that might sound familiar. You might have a lot of familiarity with those phrases. If you're new to church or just never really dug into stuff like that, this might be new for you today. And so I think this is important. There's a reason that we're covering this. Paul talks about it a lot, but there are a lot of dynamics, again, at play that I want to set up before we get to the text. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn with me. We're going to be in Romans chapter 2, and we're going to be in verses 17 all the way through verse 29 here this morning. And like I said, I want to set this up. So we mentioned this last week, and I'll mention it again, that this is a letter, okay? The book of Romans is a letter written by the Apostle Paul. A little more rehashing of last week. This is a letter written by the Apostle Paul to a group of Christians in Rome. But let's also understand that the Apostle Paul, he has never been to Rome. He did not plant this church. He does not know these people. He's writing this letter to try to build some sort of relationship and camaraderie with them. And so what we recognize pretty quickly is that this letter is different than a lot of Paul's other letters. He's not writing out of a sort of a heart to correct things. He often does that with other letters in the New Testament where maybe there's a moral failure or some sort of theological thing that's happening in a church, and he has to write to them and say, hey, here's where we should be on this. Here's some of what we should be working through. This one, he's just kind of saying, hey, church in Rome, here's what I believe. Here's the gospel. And here's why this is important. And really what he wants more than anything is he wants to get to Rome, and he wants to travel and take his ministry west. And he sees all this opportunity. He sees these believers, if he can align with them and they can believe in each other and they can partner together, he sees this as an opportunity for really great ministry stuff to happen. And so he's kind of just putting it all out there for them. But here's where I really want to set this up today. See, what we recognize in this letter is that Paul is longing to get to Rome. I'll give you a little spoiler, though. Eventually he does get there. Now again, he's not there yet as we're reading through Romans, but eventually he does get there. And I want to tell you how he actually gets there. See, Paul was pretty revolutionary. Paul went from being this Pharisee, went from being this guy who was very, very zealous about his faith and within the Jewish religion and his place and his power and his authority and his influence there, to being a person who left all that behind and said, now Jesus, I'm all in for you. Let's go, let's do this. I want to start this movement for you. And so now he's walking that out. But what he recognizes as someone who's starting this new movement is it's bigger than just the Jewish people. It's bigger than just the faith of Judaism. Paul is recognizing that this is a message, a gospel message that is for all people, Jews and Gentiles, or non-Jews, if we want to call them that. And so Paul begins to do this rather unpopular thing where he starts to befriend and minister to Jewish individuals. And he grows in relationship to such an extent with these folks that a rumor actually starts to come to the surface that Paul has allowed a Gentile, a Greek man, to actually go with him into the temple in Jerusalem. Now this would be like, this isn't just a no-no, this is a capital offense. To say that the Jewish people are upset about this is like the understatement of understatements of understatements. They catch word of this, and whether or not it actually happened, I don't know, we don't really know. It's just like a rumor that is passing around that Paul, oh, you heard about Paul, he's now friends with all these Gentiles, and I heard that he even took one into the temple, and so people are not happy, and they are in full-on mob mentality. They've got their pitchforks, and they've got their lanterns, and they are looking for Paul, and they are ready to kill Paul. Again, he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. We talked about that last week. He said there's an urgency to it. I need to go share this. I need to go communicate it. And Paul was willing, more than willing, to risk his life for the gospel. And this is one of those moments where he's about to die, and at the last moment, the Roman authorities swoop in. They arrest Paul, but really the better way of saying this is probably they rescued Paul. And they take him out to the coast a ways away, and for 2 years, the Roman authorities have Paul under arrest. He's being interrogated. He's being taken through the wringer. They want to know, Paul, what are you doing? Why are you starting this insurrection? We've already got enough headaches with the Jews anyways. Like, why are we doing all this, Paul? And they want to get to the bottom of it, but Paul is realizing very quickly that this is not going to sum up. This is not going to be over with. Like, they're probably just going to keep me here forever. And so Paul gets this idea. He pulls some strings and he says, hey guys, I want you to transfer me to Rome, and I want to go under trial in Rome for whatever my offense is. And they actually transport Paul to Rome. This is how he gets there. He's almost killed by the Jews. He's arrested/rescued by the Romans. He talks them into transferring him into Rome so he can go under trial for a crime that he's like, I don't even know what people are so mad about, but okay. And this is his strategy. This is his plan. And it's really interesting. If you go back to the end of Acts, you can read about that journey that he takes to Rome under the authority of these Roman superiors. And he walks out this, as we talked about this, as believers, we're called to walk in truth, with grace, in love, right? And so he walks this out in such a beautiful way with the Roman authorities, these people who are oppressing him and have him under arrest. He's so kind to them, he befriends them, that when they actually get to Rome, they get to his house, and they say, you know what, we're not going to throw you in a dungeon. We're not going to do all that stuff. We're just going to, Paul, you just be under house arrest. Now, he still had to wear shackles and chains, but again, he's not under house arrest, and that's in large part because of the love and the way that he allowed Christ to be an overflow in this whole process. But check this out. He doesn't spend like a couple weeks in house arrest. He spends another 2 years under house arrest in Rome. So we're talking 4 years now, Paul has been basically in shackles. And here's why I say all this. I really want to highlight this. I want you to just notice this sort of tightrope that Paul's having to walk. Right? Again, let's just start with the Romans, who have authority over the Jewish people there. So the Romans, they are the government that they're constantly just sort of rolling their eyes at the Jewish people and their faith, because it just seems so volatile, and there's all this stuff happening, and it seems like they get angry about everything, and there's all these, they're constantly fearful of insurrection, and the Roman authorities, they don't want to deal with that. So there's just sort of this like, oh, geez, we got to deal with these people. And then now there's this new movement, this thing like these Christians or these people, they call themselves the Way. And now this movement's rising up. And the Roman authorities are even more annoyed with this group because they're ruffling the feathers of the Jewish group. And they're saying, well, now we got to deal with this too? Come on. So you've got the Romans, you've got the Jews, you've got the Christians. And then here's why I say all this. And then here's Paul. Paul, who is persecuted/protected by the Romans. Paul, who is trying to maintain relationship, a healthy relationship with his Jewish brothers and sisters, so that he can lead them to Christ. And then Paul, who is going around planting churches and leading the charge and writing letters to and orchestrating this movement of new churches that are following after Jesus. And so again, you could just see like Paul walking this tightrope, right? He's like, okay, I'm gonna try to be good with the Romans, and I'm gonna try to continue to maintain things with my Jewish brothers, sisters, and I'm gonna continue to move this thing forward with Christ and with that whole thing, and he's just kind of right there in the middle. And I say all that to really set up this text today. Again, we're gonna be in Romans 2, 17 through 29. And one of the biggest things that you'll realize in this text as we break it down and we work through it is, well, if you were a Jewish person and you were hearing these words, you might want to kill Paul too. Again, remember, this letter, these words are written before he gets to Rome. But this stirring is happening. This stuff is happening in his heart. And we can see a little bit, we can see just a little bit here why the Jewish people might be a little frustrated with Paul. Here we go. Here's what he says. He says, now you, if you call yourself a Jew, if you rely on the law and boast in God, if you know his will and approve of what is superior because you are instructed by the law, if you are convinced that you are a guide for the blind, a light for those who are in the dark, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of little children, because you have in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth, you then, who teach others, do you not teach yourself? You who preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that people should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, do you dishonor God by breaking the law? As it is written, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. You see why maybe Paul's Jewish friends aren't so friendly with him? Or maybe you didn't catch all of it, so let's try and make sense out of it. Here's what Paul is saying. And this is the whole text here. He's really highlighting, again, I know I just said it, but I'll say it again. He's highlighting this tug of war, this back and forth tension between what's called the old covenant and what we call the new covenant. So let me start by explaining to you this old covenant. And it's tied in with this thing called the law. See, the law was, and if you've been around here for a while, we've talked about this a few times, so you might be familiar, but if you're not from around here, if you're new or whatever, I'm gonna walk you through it because I want us all on level ground. The law was this religious system that was set up. You can go back if you want some good reading. You can read through Leviticus. It's good stuff, right? And you can go through and you can read some of this stuff. But the law was this rigorous, just detailed, like 613 rules and regulations that say you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do this to be in good standing with God. And if you broke any of these rules, any of these regulations, then it was a sin. And we know that sin separates us from God. And so what Paul is saying here, he's saying, okay, I understand the old covenant. I understand the reason for it. We're to be in connection with God, and we are in covenant with God. And if we can keep these rules and we can keep all these regulations, and we will be in good standing with God. But it's impossible. And here's why it's impossible. Because these rules are so minute and they're so detailed, and they have to do with how you cut your hair and how you trim your beard and what kind of food you eat and who you're in relation with and who you talk to. And they just go so detailed into the finite things of what kind of things you're allowed to do if you're on your menstrual cycle, or what kind of things that you're allowed to do to then get pure from that. And it's so detailed and so crazy and so rigorous that it's impossible to keep. And so what one would have to do in order to atone for these sins or these breakings of the law, you would have to go and you'd make a sacrifice, or a priest would make a sacrifice for you. And there were all sorts of different systems and religious things you'd have to go through for that. And then when that sacrifice was made, you were pure. This is where we get the term scapegoat from. It was a goat that took the sins of the community, and then they would kill the goat. It was a scapegoat. But then what happened? 5 seconds later, someone broke another rule, another law. And it wasn't, I want to be very clear. It wasn't that this plan that God had put together was failing. This was God saying, I want to be close to my people. And I'm perfect. I am sinless. There's no blemish on me. I cannot be in the presence of sin. I'm God. And so God put together this covenant so that his people could be as close to him as possible. I want to be very clear in saying this. The old covenant wasn't some mistake or some outdated thing. It was intentional, and it had a purpose. And God used it to be close to his people. So again, when I say old covenant versus new covenant, it's not that the old covenant was a mistake, okay? It was God's way of saying, I want to be close to my people, but here's what happened. Over time, God's people lost sight of the purpose behind the covenant. Over time, it wasn't so much about the relationship anymore. It was about the rules and the regulations and all the things that have to be done not because I'm a follower of God, but because I'm a Jew. I'm a Jew. This is who I am. This is my heritage, and these are the rules and the regulations that I keep because I'm a Jew. These are the things that I do. And Paul just begins to highlight this. He just begins to say, like, look, how's all this working out for you? You can't keep all the rules and regulations, and it's gotten to a place where you don't even know why you do it anymore. We'll talk about that more in just a second. But it's actually gotten to a place where he quotes this little part here at the end. He says, as it's written, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Like, they think you're a joke, and worse, they think God's a joke. Because you've got this whole system that you don't even know what you're doing anymore. And if that doesn't ruffle feathers, wait till we get into this next part. Verse 25. Then he says this, circumcision has value if you observe the law, but if you break the law, you've become as though you had not been circumcised. Now let me just stop. Let's talk about this for a second. Some of you, again, you grew up in church. You're like, oh yeah, I get the reference to circumcision. Others, you have never been in church in your life. You're new here, and you're like, why are we talking about what? Why? Let's just get into this really quick. So long before this, okay? For whatever reason, I'm not entirely sure why this was the command or this was the thing that God wanted to use to make a distinction between his people and other people, but this was the thing that he chose. He said, listen, I want the men in my tribe, my people, I want them to be circumcised. Again, I don't really know why this was the thing that God chose to do. I mean, maybe I could see this. Maybe it was like I want to see how committed you are type thing, you know? Like if there's one thing that if I'm in that situation and someone says, hey, you're a dude, like, how about we, are you in? You willing to do that? Maybe. I also want to be very clear that this wasn't, as far as I know, like this was meant to be, well, I do know this. This was meant to be like between that guy and God, the whole circumcision thing. It wasn't like they walked around if they met a stranger in the mall or whatever, and they're like, hey, I'm Jewish. Are you Jewish? And they're like, yeah, I'm Jewish. And he's like, sweet, man. Hold on. I'm not so sure. Let's see. Like, no, like they didn't do that. Okay, like it was like it was a marker meant for you and God, like a marker meant to sort of show the relationship that you had with God. It was your commitment with God. But again, if you've lost sight of the point, if you've lost sight of the relationship, if it's just a thing now because culturally this is what my people do, this is just a thing that because I'm a Jew, I need to make sure that I do this. But, well, Paul says, what's the point? I'll go back and read it again. He says, circumcision has value if you observe the law. But if you break the law, you have become as though you have not been circumcised. So then, if those who are circumcised keep the law's requirements, will they not be regarded as though they were circumcised? The one who is not circumcised physically and yet obeys the law will condemn you who, even though you have the written code and circumcision, you are a lawbreaker. A person is not a Jew who is one only outwardly, nor is circumcision merely outward and physical. You catching this a little bit? He's talking about the relationship that one has with God. He's saying, okay, you're a Jew, you got circumcised. Cool, like there's a point to it. But to a lot of you guys, you've missed the point. And then he says this, and this would have made people mad if you were a Jew reading this and you weren't aligned with Jesus. He says this, he says, no, verse 29, no, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly. And circumcision is circumcision of the heart by the Spirit, not by the written code. Such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God. So this is the kind of stuff that has mobs of people chasing after Paul, ready to kill him. And it's not just the Roman authorities who are a little frustrated and scratching their heads at Paul and thinking we'll just keep him in jail for the rest of his life. It's the Jewish individuals, it's God's chosen people here that are looking at Paul and they're saying, hold on a second, what'd you just say? What are you saying about my background? What are you saying about my heritage? What are you saying about where I came from? What are you saying about circumcision? And here's why they don't like it. Because they are God's people. And now here's Paul saying, Jesus is for all people. And he goes so far as to say this. Let me be very clear. And this is why they would get so mad. He says, I know Gentiles. I have Greek friends who maybe they haven't been circumcised, but they know Jesus. They are in relationship with Jesus. He said, I know Gentile friends who will inherit heaven and paradise before my Jewish friends who have just been walking out this thing, well, I was born into this. My grandma was a Jew. My mom was a Jew. My grandpa was a Jew. My dad is a Jew. So I'm a Jew, but there's no relationship with God. And you could see as a person of the Jewish faith why this would be so upsetting to you. And he's saying, because Paul's saying, you're not making it about the right things. You don't care really about the relationship with God. For you, this is just your heritage, it's your background, and there's no relationship. And see, this is the point in the message where you look at me and you say, okay, Ryan, all that, I think I'm trekking with you. So I get it. The Jews probably are really mad at Paul a lot. Now he went from killing and murdering and imprisoning and being a zealot Jew and going after the Christians and flip-flopping. And now maybe some Jewish zealot people are going to go after Paul and do what he was doing the whole time. And because they're really mad about this message and they feel really offended and they can't believe that Paul is preaching this stuff. That God is for everybody? We're Jews. We're Jewish people. We're God's people. And you and I, you look at me and you say, well, what does this have to do with me now, today, all these years later? I think this is it. I think in a similar fashion, there are many of us who grew up in church. It's all you've ever known. And that's not bad. That's good. That's great. But your faith is kind of just this thing you inherited. It's this thing that was handed to you because your grandma was a Christian and your mama was a Christian, your grandpa was a Christian, your dad was a Christian, and now here you are and well, this is the family I was born into. Or let's go here, let's really get into it. You've been doing this thing for a long time where you've been trying to keep all the good Christian morals and principles, and because this is the tribe that I was born into, and so I have to do this and do this and be this and do this, and if I do, well, and I'm walking the path and doing the thing that my grandma did, my mom did, my dad did, my grandpa did, and here I am. And it kind of sounds, again, I don't want you to mishear me. I'm not in any way knocking the importance and the beauty and the power of leaving a legacy for Christ in one's family. I am not in any way knocking or speaking against the beauty of living one's faith out in their actions. There's something to that. James, the brother of Jesus, said, faith without action is dead. But there can be this pendulum swing or tug of war where we've pulled so hard on this side, this old covenant type of mentality that says, well, I have to do, and I have to accomplish, and I have to look apart, and I have to live up to this standard that my grandmother was and my mom was, and it's just this thing that I inherited, and so this is the side of the rope that I'm going to grab, and it's not really. If you were to be really honest with yourself, and I know I'm not speaking to everyone in the room, but I know I am speaking to some in the room. If you are really, truly honest with yourself, it's kind of like this old covenant mentality. You do this because it's how you were raised. You do this because it's what was ingrained in you culturally. And Paul's saying, that's not how it works. Paul's saying the new covenant is something different. The new covenant is stepping away from the rules and the systems that we distorted. And it's walking into something deeper. See, Jesus puts it this way, and this is a really hard passage, and I think I shared this a couple weeks ago, but I'm going to share it again. In Matthew 7, Jesus says this. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And did we not drive out demons and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evil doers. Crap. That's a scary passage. But I think here's what Jesus is speaking to, and it's similar to what Paul is saying. Jesus is saying there's some of you that you say you align with me, but it's the way you were raised, it's the thing that you were brought up in, it's the thing that you inherited, it's the thing that you're doing just because it feels like this is what I'm supposed to do. And so some of you are looking at me and you're saying, well, Ryan, come on, what's the big deal? But here's what I see. I see Jesus, he's saying, there will come a day where we will stand before judgment, where we will stand before God, we will stand before Jesus, and he is judging those who will spend eternity with him and those who will not. And here's what he's looking at. He's saying, did I know you? He says it in the text. He says, then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. And you'll push back, you'll say, Jesus, hold on, before we get crazy, hold on. I went to church like at least once a month, I really did. And you'll say, so what? Hold on, Jesus, wait just 1 second, don't get crazy. Listen, I helped with Sunday school, or I volunteered in children's ministry sometimes. And I'll say, that's really great. I'm sure Ryan and the church appreciated that. But so what? But you don't understand, Jesus, like every now and then I would go down and I would volunteer at the soup kitchen, or every now and then at Christmas I saw the like angel tree thing set up in this gas station by my house with all the names on it. And I would go over and I'd get the little name, and I would go get underwear and socks for this kid. It was really a nice thing. Don't you think that was nice of me, Jesus? And he says, it is really nice. That's great. And again, as followers of Jesus, there is supposed to be an overflow of love in our lives, and we are supposed to do, because faith without deeds is dead. But Jesus says there are going to be a lot of people who are going to cry out, Lord, Lord. He's going to say, I never knew you, because here's what Jesus wants. He wants relationship. He wants to know you. That's why I'm such a kicker sometimes. Like I feel like I don't know what I am. And say like, hey guys, let's like be here at church, and it's not because it's going to earn you points with God in the long run. It's because these are just opportunities for us to gather together and to try to know Jesus on a deeper level. That's why we tell you to serve. It's not because it's going to earn you points with Jesus. It's because it's going to help you know Jesus on a deeper level. This is why we say, hey, we think it's important for you to give generously to the church. It's not because it's going to earn you points with Jesus or that it's going to get you into heaven. It's because I think it's going to help you grow in your understanding and your knowledge and your relationship with Jesus. I'll throw it up there one more time. It said this. Jesus said, I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. He wants to know you. He wants to know you. So let me throw just one more time over to this verse. Verse 29. In Romans 2, again, the Apostle Paul, he says, no, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly. And circumcision is circumcision of the heart. By the Spirit, not by written code. When God instituted the old covenant, yes, it was a code, but it was meant to bring the Creator and the creation closer together. But over time, that was lost. Not by written code. Such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God. And so God instituted a new covenant through Jesus, through the cross and the resurrection. And if I were to try to put these two things together, to try to, again, contrast the back and forth between Old Covenant and New Covenant, here's how I would phrase it. See, the Old Covenant says you have to do a bunch of stuff to be close to God. The New Covenant, though, The new covenant says this. The new covenant says Jesus did the thing that gets you as close to God as possible. But here's my confession as someone who grew up in church my whole life. It's really hard to shake old covenant thinking. But new covenant thinking is just saying, Jesus, I want to know you. I want to be in relationship with you. I want to grow in that relationship with you. And out of the overflow of my love and my affection and my pursuit of you, that's why we try to walk with some sense of morality, with some sense of conviction. Because the actions aren't earning us points with God. He really just wants your heart. He really just wants your heart. So I'm going to ask our servers to begin passing the communion elements. And as they're doing that, I'm going to ask you to just hold them. And I want to close with this. We'll take them in just a few minutes. We'll have time at the end of the message here. This week, I was speaking down at a camp. And all week long, the theme of this camp was the story of the prodigal son. I mean, we just worked through it from every different angle and every different session, all these different weavings and parts of it. And if you don't know the story of the prodigal son, I want to share it with you real quick. See, it's a story that really has two primary characters and then kind of a third character as well. But it starts with a father and his rebellious son. And when I say rebellious, I mean pretty rebellious. And one day this son, he comes to his dad and he says, hey dad, listen, I know I'm due for an inheritance. I know eventually you're gonna croak and I'm gonna get some money. And can we just speed this up a little bit? I don't even care enough to wait it out. Can you just give me my inheritance now and I'll just leave like you're dead anyways? I mean, literally, it's like this son is saying to his dad, I don't care if you're dead or alive. Can I just go? And by the way, can I have my money? And so the dad, it's interesting, but the dad, because he's kind and he's gracious and he's loving, he says, okay, son. Like he gives him free will. That's this other really beautiful aspect that I think sometimes we can miss in that story is he lets his son choose. God loves us so much that he's not a puppet master pulling strings and forcing us to do things or not do things. He loves us so much that he actually gives us the ability to choose not to love him back. Because he knows if he's just pulling strings, that's not really love anyways. And so the son, he takes his money and he goes and he squanders it and what the Bible calls wild living. Like he just does all this stuff, the prostitutes and the bars and the clubs and all this stuff. And he blows all of his money, like all of it, it's gone. He squanders every bit of it. And he finds himself broke and he gets this like bottom of the rung job feeding pigs. And this is how horrible his situation has become. This is how just demoralizing and just bottom of the rung, just everything is. That one day he's feeding the pigs, and I just sort of imagine he's got like the bag or whatever full of all the pods and the slop, and he's sort of like dragging it in, and here's the trough, and the pigs are all around. Is nasty. Everything's nasty. He's covered in mud, and he just brings this thing over, and he's like trying to get it up into the trough to feed the pigs. And he's got the bag and kind of gets under it, and he's like, oh, and he sort of just pours the food into the trough. And then just imagine like how, again, if you're a farmer, if you're from Louisville, okay? And so we'll just, and so he does this, and so all the pigs, I haven't done a Louisville joke in a while, so all the pigs come in, and they just start like, and they're just grousing, making all these noises and grunting and everything. He's pouring the pods in, and I just imagine like it was this moment where he comes face to face. There's this pig, and it's just snout, and it's in his face, right? He actually has this moment where he looks at, like, just so all this, filth and all this stuff happening. He looks at these pigs, and he looks at the food, and he's so hungry now. He says, like, man, that looks good. That food looks good. And again, the text says this. It says that he came to his senses. He has this sort of epiphany, and he says, I know that my dad is good. I know that he loves me, and I know that I've written myself off as a son. I know that he won't take me back as a son because I've done too much stuff, and I know I wished him dead. I know that's not cool. So I'll just go back and I'll ask him if I can be a servant. And he races back home, and I look at it this way. I sort of envision it this way. This isn't how the story plays out, or is written in the text, but I'm taking some liberties. I sort of imagine the father then. It's like early in the morning. The sun's just coming up in the distance, and he's got a bathrobe on and his slippers on, and he's drinking his coffee, and he's standing at the sink, and he's just doing the dishes, just washing them. He's maybe humming a little song, but it's like a somber song because his son is gone and he's still heartbroken over this. And he looks out the window and he sees in the distance a silhouette making its way toward him. And I just imagine maybe he takes another sip of his drink and puts it down, and he washes another dish, and then he sees the silhouette getting closer and closer, and eventually he realizes who that silhouette is. And again, I just have this image of like he just drops the plate and crashes to the ground, and he races out the door, and he swings the screen door open, and he just takes off down the driveway. And if it's you and me, and you have this person in your life that looks you in the eye and says, I don't care if you're dead or alive, I don't care who you are, I don't care what position or what power or what influence or what authority you have, I don't care anything, I don't care how much you love me. Here's what I really want. Here's all I really want is I want my money, and I want to go, and I want to take it. Hi, sweetie, how are you? Thank you so much. And he says, I just want to go. If that's you and that's me and we're in that situation, we're going to race down that driveway, and we're going to say, you have no place here. Get out of here. This isn't your home anymore. But here's what the father does. He races down the driveway, and I just imagine the slippers have flown off, his hair is flowing through the wind, his bathrobe is burst open, he's got his boxer shorts on, or worse, maybe whitey-tighties, and he's just running. And it says in the text that he throws his arms around his son. And his son is like, in the midst of that, his son is like, Dad, I'm so sorry, I know what I did, I'm so sorry, I screwed up, I know, I don't deserve to be called your son. And the dad covers him and kisses, and the dad says, what are you talking about? You're my son, you were lost and now you're found, you were dead and now you're alive, what are you talking about? Someone kill the fattened calf, we're having steak tonight, let's go put the ring on his finger with the family crest because he's in our family. Get the bagpipes out. We're going to rock and roll tonight. And when I think about New Covenant versus Old Covenant, again, don't mishear me. I'm not saying that God just wants us to go and all of us should leave here today and go, clubbing and prostitutes, okay? But this new covenant mentality is this, it's relationship. It's the father being as close as possible to his children. And then there's this other person in the story, and I'll wrap this up. I'm going really long, I'll wrap this up. There's this other person's story, the other brother. You know what the text says? It says that he's out in the field, and what's he doing? He's working. He's doing all the right stuff. And he gets mad, and he goes in, and he tells his dad, he's like, what are you doing? You killed the fattened calf for him? And the father has to sort of bring things into perspective. He says, you don't understand. Your brother is dead, but now he's alive. And I hear this story, and I see this tension. Here's one who understands the closeness and the relationship and the love of God. And then here's this other one who's saying, well, I'll just do the right stuff. I'll do the things because it's what I'm supposed to do. But he's missing out on the depth and the beauty and the power of what he could have with the Father. Jesus said someday there will be a judgment. And there will be some, they'll say, I did all the stuff that my grandma told me to do. And he'll say, but I never knew you. New covenant. Maybe it's best summed up in these words. And we'll go into a time of communion here. It's these words that I've been saying a lot this summer. And maybe this is the prayer that you pray right now. New covenant is just saying, Jesus, give me your heart. Jesus, I'm giving you mine. Father God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the power that we can have through relationship with you. God, I pray that we don't get caught up, as we've said again this summer, in all the doing, but Father, our heart and our focus is on who we are being as members of a new covenant. A covenant that was established when Jesus went to a cross and died so that no other sacrifices would have to be made. A covenant that was set up so that a chasm could be bridged once and for all. Father, we want to walk in that covenant and that relationship with you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.